George Smith Patton Jr. was an American warrior and one of the most controversial military commanders in United States history. Born on November 11, 1885 in San Gabriel, California, Patton came from a family steeped in military tradition and Southern aristocratic values. He would become one of the most aggressive and successful combat commanders of World War II, a general whose very name struck fear into enemy forces. Yet he was also a deeply complex man, plagued by self-doubt, driven by an obsession with destiny, and ultimately undone by his own inability to control his tongue. Patton's early life was one of privilege and expectation. His family was wealthy, owning substantial property in Southern California. His father, George Smith Patton Sr., was a lawyer and politician who came from a distinguished Virginia family. His mother, Ruth Wilson, came from a prominent California family. Young George grew up on the family ranch, surrounded by stories of military glory. His grandfather and great-uncle had both been Confederate officers killed in the Civil War, and their sacrifice became central to the family mythology. Despite his privileged background, Patton faced significant challenges as a child. He suffered from what was likely dyslexia, though the condition was not understood at the time. He struggled to read and write, and did not learn to read until he was 12 years old. This learning difficulty caused him tremendous frustration and embarrassment. He compensated by developing an extraordinary memory, having books read aloud to him, and memorizing vast amounts of poetry, military history, and classical literature. This early struggle gave him a fierce determination to prove himself and an insecurity that would drive him throughout his life. Patton was educated at home until his teens, then attended the Virginia Military Institute for 1 year before receiving an appointment to the United States Military Academy at West Point. He entered West Point in 1904, older than most of his classmates. His academic struggles continued, particularly in mathematics, and he was forced to repeat his first year. This setback humiliated him, but he persevered. He excelled in military subjects and athletics, particularly fencing and track. He graduated in 1909, ranked 46th in a class of 103, but he had developed the military bearing and discipline that would define his career. After graduation, Patton was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the cavalry. He married Beatrice Eyre in 1910, a woman from a wealthy Massachusetts family. Beatrice was intelligent, cultured, and devoted to her husband. She would support him throughout his career, tolerating his ambitions, his temper, and his infidelities. They had 3 children, and Beatrice managed the family while Patton pursued military glory. In 1912, Patton represented the United States in the modern pentathlon at the Stockholm Olympics. He finished 5th overall, a respectable showing that brought him some recognition. He was particularly skilled at fencing and pistol shooting, and he became one of the Army's leading experts on swordsmanship. He designed a new cavalry saber that was adopted by the Army, and he wrote the service's manual on saber tactics. This work established him as a serious military thinker, not just a soldier. Patton's first taste of combat came in 1916 during the punitive expedition into Mexico. The United States sent troops across the border to pursue Pancho Villa, the Mexican revolutionary who had raided American territory. Patton served as an aide to General John J. Pershing, the expedition commander. During one mission, Patton led a motorized patrol that attacked a ranch where Villa's men were hiding. In a brief firefight, Patton personally killed 2 of Villa's officers. He strapped their bodies to the hood of his car and drove back to headquarters, an act that was both practical and theatrical. The incident made headlines and established Patton as a fighting officer. When the United States entered World War I in 1917, Patton was desperate to see combat. He sailed to France as part of Pershing's staff, but he wanted a combat command. He saw the future in the new tank corps and volunteered to establish the American Tank Training School. Tanks were primitive machines in 1917, slow, unreliable, and mechanically troublesome. But Patton recognized their potential to break the stalemate of trench warfare. Patton threw himself into learning everything about tanks. He traveled to French and British tank schools, studied tactics, and personally drove and maintained the machines. He established the American Tank Training Center and wrote the Army's first manual on tank operations. He was promoted to lieutenant colonel and given command of the 304th Tank Brigade. In September 1918, Patton led his tanks into combat during the Meuse-Argonne offensive. He was in his element, personally leading his tanks forward on foot, directing traffic under fire, and pushing his men to advance. On September 26th, while leading an attack near the town of Chepi, Patton was shot through the leg by machine gun fire. The wound was serious, and he was evacuated to hospital. For his leadership under fire, he was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross. The war ended while he was recovering, and Patton had proven himself as a combat leader. The years between the world wars were frustrating for Patton. The Army shrank dramatically after World War I, promotions were frozen, and opportunities for advancement were limited. Patton reverted to his permanent rank of captain, though he was later promoted to major. He spent years in routine assignments, studying military history, playing polo, and preparing for a war he was certain would come. Patton attended the Command and General Staff College and the Army War College, the Army's advanced schools for senior officers. He read voraciously, studying the campaigns of Napoleon, Frederick the Great, Julius Caesar, and other great commanders. He developed elaborate theories about reincarnation, becoming convinced that he had lived previous lives as a warrior. He believed he had fought with Alexander the Great, served in the Roman legions, and ridden with Napoleon. These beliefs, which he discussed openly, contributed to his reputation as eccentric. During the 1920s and 1930s, Patton remained one of the Army's leading advocates for mechanized warfare. He argued that tanks should be used for rapid, aggressive attacks rather than as infantry support. He clashed with conservative officers who saw no future for armored warfare. He wrote articles, gave lectures, and refined his tactical theories. When the Army finally began to modernize in the late 1930s, Patton was recognized as one of its leading experts on armored operations. When World War II began in Europe in 1939, Patton was 54 years old and still a colonel, but the expansion of the Army brought rapid promotions. He was promoted to Brigadier General in 1940, then Major General in 1941. He was given command of the 2nd Armored Division and later the 1st Armored Corps. He trained his men relentlessly, demanding speed, aggression, and discipline. He developed a flamboyant personal style, wearing highly polished boots, riding breeches, and carrying ivory-handled revolvers. He cultivated an image of the warrior general, profane, aggressive, and fearless. After the United States entered the war in December 1941, Patton was chosen to command American forces in Operation Torch, the invasion of North Africa in November 1942. He led the Western Task Force, which landed in Morocco. The operation was successful, though American forces soon encountered the experienced German Afrika Korps. In their first major engagement at Kasserine Pass in Tunisia, American forces were badly defeated. In the aftermath of Kasserine, Patton was given command of II Corps and ordered to restore the unit's fighting spirit. He arrived like a whirlwind, imposing strict discipline, demanding proper uniforms and military courtesy, and personally appearing at the front to inspire his men. He fined soldiers for not wearing helmets, required ties to be worn even in combat zones, and insisted on aggressive action. His methods were harsh, but they worked. Within weeks, II Corps was transformed into an effective fighting force. Patton led II Corps in the final campaigns in Tunisia, driving the Germans back and contributing to the surrender of Axis forces in May 1943. He was promoted to Lieutenant General and given command of the 7th Army for the invasion of Sicily. The Sicily campaign in July and August 1943 showcased both Patton's genius and his flaws. He drove his army forward in a brilliant campaign of rapid movement, racing British forces to capture Palermo and then Messina. His aggressive leadership helped secure the island in just 38 days. But during the Sicily campaign, Patton committed the acts that nearly ended his career. While visiting field hospitals, he encountered soldiers suffering from battle fatigue, what would today be called post-traumatic stress disorder. Patton, who had no patience for what he considered cowardice, verbally abused and physically struck 2 soldiers, calling them cowards and ordering them back to the front. When the incidents became public, there was outrage in the press and in Congress. General Dwight Eisenhower, the Supreme Allied Commander and Patton's superior, seriously considered sending Patton home in disgrace. Eisenhower ultimately decided that Patton was too valuable to lose. He reprimanded Patton and forced him to apologize to the soldiers and to his troops, but Patton was removed from command and spent months in limbo while the controversy died down. It was a humiliating experience for a man obsessed with honor and glory. He spent the winter of 1943-1944 in England, uncertain whether he would ever command troops again. Eisenhower gave Patton another chance. He was appointed to command the 3rd Army, which would enter combat in France after the D-Day invasion. To deceive the Germans, Patton was also made the nominal commander of a fictitious army group that the Allies wanted the Germans to believe would invade at Calais. The deception worked, and German intelligence remained convinced that Patton, whom they considered the Allies' best general, would lead the main invasion. 3rd Army became operational on August 1, 1944, after American forces had broken out of the Normandy beachhead. Patton was finally unleashed, and he conducted one of the most spectacular campaigns in military history. The 3rd Army raced across France in a campaign of rapid movement that stunned both the Germans and the Allies. Patton's tanks advanced 50 miles in some days, liberating vast areas of France and destroying German units that could not retreat fast. Patton's operational style was based on speed, aggression, and relentless forward movement. He believed that an army should never stop attacking, that momentum was everything, and that audacity could overcome superior numbers. He pushed his commanders and his men to their limits and beyond. He appeared constantly at the front, encouraging, threatening, and inspiring. His profane speeches became legendary, filled with crude language and appeals to masculine pride. The 3rd Army's advance was finally halted in September 1944 when it ran out of fuel. The Allied supply lines still running from the Normandy beaches could not keep pace with Patton's advance. He was furious at being stopped, convinced that if given adequate supplies he could have driven into Germany and ended the war in 1944. Whether this was true remains debated by historians, but the supply shortage forced the Third Army to halt. In December 1944, the Germans launched their last major offensive in the West, the Battle of the Bulge. A massive German attack through the Ardennes forest created a bulge in the Allied lines and threatened to reach the crucial supply port of Antwerp. American forces were surrounded at Bastogne and the situation was critical. At a meeting of Allied commanders, Eisenhower asked how quickly Patton could disengage from his current operations and attack north to relieve Bastogne. Patton's answer astonished everyone. He said he could attack in 48 hours with 3 divisions. Other generals thought it impossible to disengage from combat, turn an entire army 90 degrees and attack in a different direction in just 2 days. But Patton had anticipated the crisis and had already prepared contingency plans. The Third Army executed one of the most remarkable maneuvers of the war, turning north and smashing into the German flank. Within days, Patton's forces had relieved Bastogne and blunted the German offensive. It was Patton's finest hour, a demonstration of operational brilliance and aggressive leadership. After the Battle of the Bulge, the Third Army drove into Germany. Patton's forces crossed the Rhine River and raced through southern Germany, liberating concentration camps, capturing hundreds of thousands of prisoners, and advancing into Czechoslovakia. Patton wanted to drive all the way to Prague and beyond, but he was ordered to halt to allow Soviet forces to occupy Czechoslovakia as had been agreed by the Allied leaders. The end of the war in May 1945 left Patton frustrated and angry. He was convinced that the Soviet Union would be the next enemy and that the Allies should continue fighting, driving the Soviets out of Eastern Europe. He made these views public, creating diplomatic problems. He was also critical of denazification policies, arguing that Germany needed experienced administrators even if they had been Nazi Party members. His comments caused controversy and embarrassment for the Eisenhower and the Truman administration. In October 1945, Eisenhower removed Patton from command of the Third Army and gave him a largely ceremonial position commanding the 15th Army, a headquarters responsible for writing the history of the European campaign. It was a clear demotion, and Patton knew his career was over. He was 60 years old, in declining health and increasingly out of step with the post-war world. On December 9, 1945, Patton was riding in his staff car near Mannheim, Germany, when the car collided with an American Army truck. Patton was thrown forward and struck his head on a partition in the car. The injury severed his spinal cord, leaving him paralyzed from the neck down. He was taken to a hospital in Heidelberg where doctors determined that his injury was irreparable. Patton lingered for 12 days, paralyzed but conscious. He knew he was dying and faced death with the same courage he had shown in battle. He spoke with his wife Beatrice, who had flown from the United States to be with him. On December 21, 1945, George S. Patton died of a pulmonary embolism and congestive heart failure. He was 60 years old. Patton was buried in the American Military Cemetery in Luxembourg, among the soldiers of the Third Army who had died under his command. His grave is marked by a simple white cross, identical to those of the enlisted men buried around him. Thousands of people attended his funeral, and he was mourned as one of America's greatest combat commanders. Patton's legacy is complex and controversial. As a military commander, his record is extraordinary. The Third Army, under his leadership, advanced farther and faster, captured more enemy prisoners, and liberated more territory than any other Allied army. His operational brilliance, his aggressive tactics, and his ability to inspire men in combat were unmatched. Military historians rank him among the greatest American generals, alongside Grant, Lee, and MacArthur, but Patton's character flaws were as legendary as his military skills. His treatment of soldiers suffering from combat fatigue was cruel and showed a fundamental lack of understanding of psychological wounds. His public statements about politics and policy were often inappropriate and harmful. His belief in his own destiny sometimes crossed into megalomania. He was profane, arrogant, and difficult to work with. Modern assessments of Patton recognize both his genius and his limitations. He was a brilliant tactical and operational commander, perhaps the best the American Army produced in World War II. His understanding of mobile warfare, his ability to move large formations quickly, and his instinct for the enemy's weaknesses were extraordinary. He inspired fierce loyalty in his men, who recognized that his aggressive tactics, while costly, often resulted in quicker victories and ultimately saved lives. Yet Patton was also a product of his time and class, holding views on race, class, and masculinity that were problematic even in the 1940s and are unacceptable today. He believed in a warrior aristocracy and saw himself as part of an ancient tradition of military leaders. His belief in reincarnation and destiny was genuine, not an affectation, and it shaped how he understood his role in history. Perhaps the best way to understand Patton is as a man born for war who found his purpose in combat. In peacetime, his aggressive instincts and his inability to compromise made him a liability, but in war these same qualities made him invaluable. He was the general you wanted when the situation was desperate and only audacity could win. He was the commander who would attack when others hesitated, who would take risks that more cautious generals would avoid. Patton once said that his ambition was to be killed in the last battle of the last war. He did not get that death, but he died as a soldier in uniform in the country he had helped liberate. His death so soon after the war's end seemed almost fitting, as if there was no place for him in the peaceful world his victories had helped create. In the decades since his death, Patton has remained a controversial and fascinating figure. Books, films, and documentaries have examined his life and career. The 1970 film Patton, starring George C. Scott, won 7 Academy Awards and introduced Patton to a new generation. The film captured both his brilliance and his flaws, presenting him as a complex figure rather than a simple hero. George S. Patton represents a particular type of military leader, the aggressive combat commander who wins battles through audacity and willpower. His legacy includes his tactical innovations, his leadership of the Third Army, and his role in defeating Nazi Germany. He is remembered as one of America's greatest generals and as a symbol of aggressive, victorious warfare. His life demonstrated that genius and flaw often coexist, and that the qualities that make a great warrior may not make a great man.